Hello, everyone. Ugh. I should be. I should. It's gonna be a quick chat. I think I did this on here before, but I'm not sure exactly if I did it here or on Instagram. Dear African moms, yeah, dear African moms or African parents, Somalis, East Africans, West Africans, those communities, they are my lived experiences. And your reputation, as in you as a good person, not your reputation as in does your community respect you, but your reputation as in the visible things that you have put above the mental health of your own kids. But your reputation, these kids are loud. The thing that makes you spiral when your kid posts something on social media or your kid does something that you have not done in your lifetime, at least that the kids know of, right? The thing that turns a minor, completely harmless moment into a full-blown interrogation that leaves your child feeling like a criminal for existing. That reputation, I want us to have a conversation about that today. That parenting conversation, right? Because I feel like a lot of the times in our communities, we feel what is happening, but we don't have the exact wording for it. So what we are talking about has, a name in psychology, you can say. It's called shame-based parenting. And it is when a parent's primary tool, okay, a parent's primary tool of guidance and discipline is shame. Not correction, not a conversation, not explaining why something is wrong. Shame. It could be public shame, community shame, the threat of what other people will think. And here's what we can say, when it comes to research, what we have found out in research, what it does to your kids, right? Consistently, parental psychological control, right, which includes things like shame, guilt, guilt induction, and monitoring behavior driven by reputation rather than a genuine concern for the child, is directly linked to higher rates of anxiety and these depressive symptoms in children, adolescents, right? So when a parent, you as a mom, you as a dad, this is for my African parents, yeah? When your primary response is to their child's behavior, it's shame. When the first question is, are you okay? It's not, are you okay? It's, what were you thinking? Right? Let's talk about this. But instead, it will be like, what will people say? You're embarrassing me. Do you know what this looks like? Now, you are actually going to have your child's mental health suffer measurably, consistently, right? And this is consistent across cultures and across age groups, especially in the African diaspora. We have in our Somali community, or if you more people might precisely know as the Bantu community or whatnot, the African community as a whole, our parents are so so like connected in the sense, in a negative way, what the community says about them, that they will do anything in their power to basically going back to shaming their child, not really understanding that kid, talking about their kids, just like, oh, you're a this, what people will say about me. And there have been a lot of research, you can say, parental rejection and overprotection had negative effects on adolescents and mental health by having the kids, their self-esteem being lowered and increasing this psychological inflexibility, meaning children raised in these environments, they have hard time adapting, hard time coping, and hard time regulating their emotions in healthy ways, right? So it means when your kid grows up being consistently shamed for how their behavior reflects on the family, doesn't just feel bad in that moment. They internalize that shame. They carry it. They grow into adults who feel deeply and consistently and constantly like they're not enough. Like their value is always conditioned on what will people think of me. That can make the hyena. High Melena that can, That's gonna be their mentality. Like they have to perform their own worth rather than just exist in it. And that's going to take a long time for that wound to heal. Right? And I know, like our parents, I'm not going to stand here and pretend like this came from nowhere from them, right? I know in Africa, right? In many African households, yeah, reputation is survival. I know that. I'm not blind to it. When you are a part of the diaspora community, when you're an immigrant or a child of immigrants, when your community is, you can say, your safety net in a country that was not built for you, especially as an African person, your standing in that community matters. Practically, it can affect who helps you when you need help, right? A lot of the times in our communities, if you're not, in our African community as a whole, if you're not a person that's involved in the community or you're not known in the community, you will get help, but it's not going to be as effective as someone who is involved in the community. So it can affect your child's marriage prospect. It can affect your social capital in real and very much tangible ways. Like I can understand that. But a lot of our parents, their reputation matters so much that it doesn't matter what their child is going through. Make us on postgrade, make us in samati. Hewel sana da. They're always constantly worried about what the neighbor will say, what that community member will say, and not really trying to sit down and understand what their child is going through, right? Like not having a conversation with their kids. And yes, there's a version of the reputation that actually is about values, like, making sure, as a parent, you want to make sure your child is carrying themselves with dignity, about representing your faith and your family well, right? That version is real and valid, and that is something that they should hone into. But there's a line that crosses when your child's behavior, even a completely harmless behavior, triggers a response in you that is more about the community will say than about your actual child. You have crossed that line, right? When someone forwards you a video or when someone says something about your child, and your kid is not that type of kid, right? Your child doesn't behave that way, but someone calls you first and says, oh, such and such, and you're like, oh my God, you come and go off on your kid without saying, hey, are you okay? Did something happen? What was that about? But instead, you go and scold that kid in you're pressed. In that moment, you're not parenting. You're basically reputation managing, you understand? And when your child is not a child, right? When your child is not your child in that moment, that is when you're basically working on your social currency. And no child should have to feel like their parents value their image more than their person. Like I should not, as a child, feel like my mom, my dad don't care about me. They care more about what people are going to say. So they rather have me not speak what I want to say, let me be shut, like be mute and stuff, and let them just, go on about of, oh, so and so is gonna say this, so don't do it, okay? The community is gonna think this of me, okay? Don't do it. You know what I mean? So some of our mothers genuinely do not know, not because they don't care, right? But I feel like maybe somebody never told them because they were raised in this way. They were raised this way. What is familiar doesn't always feel like damage. Imagine a young person, a teenager or a young adult who genuinely tries, who is, they're not doing any trouble. They're just living. And every time you do anything visible, post something or go somewhere, make a decision that someone from the community might see, there is this weight, this preemptive anxiety, this voice in the back of your head says, what is mama going to hear about this? Or when is mama going to hear about this? And what is she going to say to me when I get home? So that voice doesn't just go away when you leave the home. It follows you. It shapes you on what you post, on what you do, what you say, what you allow yourself to enjoy. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, you're always calculating, will this reflect badly on my family? Right? And that's a value at least you want to have, right, as a Muslim and whatnot, right? Will somebody send this video to my parents, And there has been some research done, I believe, where, children who perceived higher psychological control from their parents were more likely, as I mentioned, they're going to have anxiety, more depressive episodes or symptoms, right? They don't want to be the source of embarrassment. I feel like sometimes, as I've been, growing up throughout my life in an African home, there's always been that rigid. I've always been that, you can say, is it rigid? Like very, yeah, I'll say rigid, like, very, very strict, you can say, in my own way of definition of strictness, just not trying to rebel. You can say I would perform, I would suppress, I would shrink, manage anything that's not going to bring any type of bad, what's that terminology, anything that's not going to bring any shame to the family, right? And to the aunties and uncles and sisters and all those of you that are constantly, forwarding things to other family members, like to the parent of that child, if you genuinely care, if you genuinely care for that child, you as an auntie, you as a friend should speak to that kid directly without trying to cause a wedge or infuse something that's not there, right? And then if I were to tie this back to the deen of Islam, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, is it enough of a sin for a person to speak of everything that they hear? So this hadith alone should be enough for every auntie, uncles, and all of those people forwarding videos and pause. There's this concept in our religion, husnul dhan, assuming the best of people. Right, there's a limit to it, right? Our deen explicitly explains or commands us to assume the best of our fellow Muslims before assuming the worst. So before you spiral into why would they post this? Who are they associated with? What will people think? Go back to that Islamic baseline. Go back to that Islamic baseline. Assume the best. To ask, to have a conversation, not to assume and react, right? And here's something I think gets lost in our community, in our African communities. None of us truly believe, as the Prophet ﷺ says, none of us truly believe until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. So this applies to your children. Do you love your children and what you love? Don't you love your children for what you love for yourself, basically? Do you love them for the dignity of being presumed innocent until you actually talk to them? Do you love them the peace of knowing the peace of knowing their parents, right? And not to protect the family image from them, because there are different things. And I think some of the mothers, some of the parents, African parents, yeah, have confused the two. Many of our mothers were raised in environments where reputation was literally tied to safety, right? And in the cultures where women standing in a community determined her access to support, to marriage, to resource, protecting that reputation was not vanity, and which is understandable. It was survival. And then they brought that survival mechanism into them to the diaspora. And they're still operating in a context where the stakes are genuinely different, where their children are not going to be rejected for society for posting a video or speaking their mind on social media, where a moment on social media is not actually going to ruin anyone's life unless the reaction that, to it makes it a bigger deal than it needs to be, right? So love your children deeply, fiercely, in ways that are, beautiful and sacrificial and real. It's not really about questioning a mother's love here. It's about asking, you know, love to look different, to lead with the child instead of leading with the community, right? What you need to change, what they need to change is when something happens involving your child, real or perceived, call your child first. Not react, not to interrogate, but to ask and say, hey, I saw something. Can we talk about it? Have a conversation, not an assumption, not a prosecution. And be honest with yourself about what is actually driving you this reaction. Is it genuinely concern for your child's well-being, or is it anxiety about what people are going to say? Because those are two different things, yeah? And thirdly, consider what your children are learning from watching, you to respond to reputation pressure. They're watching you. They're learning from what to prioritize. And if they see you that your first concern when something happens is always, well, what would the community think? Yeah, they're going to internalize that. They're going to grow up believing that their value is contingent on other people's approval. And that's very heavy, heavy thing to carry for the rest of your life. Last and not least, to the mothers who are reading or listening to this and feeling defensive, I'm not asking you to stop caring about your values or your deen or your family character. What I'm saying is make sure that when you correct your child, it is actually about their character and not about your comfort. There's a difference. Your child can feel the difference. They always can. Okay? Anyway, so that's just my little spiel or my little rant. I love my African community. I love my diaspora. I love being African. Left, right, and center, yeah? Love it, love it, love it, love it. I'm just saying that we can do better. The parents can do better. And the ones that are doing better already, great. The ones that are not, learn from it and do better.